5 bullets. That's what it took to shatter the criminal underworld. They weren't meant for her. But when the smoke cleared, the city's most feared Mafia boss wasn't holding his mother. He was holding the bleeding, breathless woman everyone else had overlooked. And his reign of terror was just beginning. Harper Hayes was used to being invisible. In a city like Chicago, where money, power, and sharp edges dictated your worth, a woman of her size was often relegated to the background. Harper was undeniably fat. She had soft, heavy curves, a round face with warm amber eyes, and a body that took up space in a world that constantly told her to shrink. But Harper had long ago stopped apologizing for her existence. She was an exceptional physical therapist, specializing in high-risk geriatric trauma, and her hands possessed a healing magic that no one could deny. It was a Tuesday in early October when her agency assigned her to the Romano estate. The briefing was strictly confidential, shrouded in non-disclosure agreements and veiled warnings. Her patient was Eleanor Romano, a 72-year-old matriarch recovering from a devastating stroke and a shattered hip. What the agency didn't explicitly state, but what everyone in the city whispered, was that Eleanor's son was Gabriel Romano. Gabriel was the head of the Romano syndicate, a man whose name could clear a crowded room in seconds. He was ruthless, calculating, and famously cold. The sprawling estate on the edge of Lake Michigan was a fortress, crawling with armed security, disguised as groundskeepers. When Harper first arrived, carrying her heavy medical bag up the marble steps, she felt the immediate stinging judgment of the estate's staff. The maids were thin and terrified. The guards were massive and stoic. They looked at Harper's soft, full figure straining against her maroon scrubs and dismissed her instantly. She was no threat. She was just the fat nurse hired to do the heavy lifting. Eleanor Romano was a difficult patient, bitter, fiercely independent, and furious at her own frail body. She had driven away 3 previous therapists in less than a month. When Harper walked into the dimly lit, opulent bedroom, Eleanor hurled a silver water carafe at the wall, missing Harper's head by inches. "Get out," Eleanor rasped, her face pale and drawn. "I don't need another useless girl poking at me." Harper didn't flinch. She calmly set her bag down, walked over to the spilled water, and tossed a towel over it. "Good morning, Mrs. Romano," Harper said, her voice a soothing, unshakable alto. "You have a fantastic throwing arm. We'll be using that strength today for your upper body mobility." From the shadows of the doorway, a low, rich chuckle broke the tension. Harper turned to see Gabriel Romano leaning against the doorframe. He was breathtakingly intimidating. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Harper's car. His dark eyes locked onto her, piercing and unreadable. He had expected another weeping, fragile girl. Instead, he saw a woman who stood her ground, her physical presence solid and unmovable. "She's stubborn, Miss Hayes," Gabriel said, his voice like grinding gravel. "So am I, Mr. Romano," Harper replied, meeting his gaze without a trace of the fear he was accustomed to seeing. "And I don't charge by the hour, I charge by the session, so we can sit here and glare at each other, or we can get to work." Gabriel's brow arched. A strange flicker of amusement crossed his face before he nodded, pushing himself off the doorframe. "Take care of my mother. She is everything to me." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, but Harper merely nodded. Over the next 2 months, a profound shift occurred within the cold walls of the Romano mansion. Harper's methods were gentle but incredibly firm. Her size, which others saw as a flaw, became her greatest asset here. She used her weight and leverage to safely support Eleanor during grueling walking exercises, becoming a literal pillar of strength for the frail woman. Harper never coddled Eleanor. She treated her with a blunt, honest dignity that slowly chipped away at the matriarch's icy exterior. Soon, the therapy sessions were filled with quiet laughter. Eleanor began to eagerly await Harper's arrival, sharing stories of her youth in Sicily, while Harper braided the older woman's thinning hair. And Gabriel watched. He watched from the security monitors. He watched from his study window. He found himself inexplicably drawn to the soft, warm woman who moved through his dark world like a beacon of light. In his life, women were either currency, liabilities, or decorative, starving things looking for a payout. Harper was none of those. She was real. She had a loud, genuine laugh that echoed in the marble halls. She ate the chef's heavy pasta dishes with unashamed joy, closing her eyes in bliss at the taste of the rich sauces. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Gabriel found Harper in the massive industrial kitchen, quietly sipping tea. "You've worked a miracle with her," Gabriel said, stepping into the light. Harper looked up, her cheeks flushing slightly, highlighting the soft curve of her jaw. "She did the work, Mr. Romano. She just needed someone who wasn't afraid she was going to break." "Are you afraid of anything, Harper?" Gabriel asked, stepping closer. For the first time, she felt the magnetic, dangerous pull of the man. He was looking down at her, but not with the dismissive gaze she had endured her whole life. His eyes tracked the soft slope of her neck, the fullness of her breasts beneath her sweater, the curve of her hips. He was looking at her as if she were something precious, something deeply desired. "I'm afraid of failing," Harper whispered, suddenly breathless. Gabriel reached out, his calloused, violent hand gently brushing a stray curl behind her ear. The touch was electric. "You couldn't fail if you tried," he murmured. It was a quiet, terrifying realization for Gabriel. The ruthless Mafia boss, a man who trusted no one, was falling violently, obsessively in love with the gentle, plus-size physical therapist who was single-handedly keeping his mother alive. But in Gabriel's world, love was not a gift. It was a target, and the O'Sullivan family from Boston had just found the bullseye. November arrived with a bitter chill, but Sundays at the Romano estate were always sacred. It was the one day Gabriel mandated total peace. No business, no phone calls, just family. Because of her deep bond with Eleanor, Harper had been unofficially absorbed into this inner circle, invited to stay for the extravagant Sunday lunches. The security perimeter had been pushed back to give Eleanor the illusion of freedom as she took her daily walk in the expansive, walled botanical gardens behind the mansion. The autumn leaves were a fiery display of reds and golds, crunching beneath Eleanor's orthotic shoes. Harper walked closely beside her, her thick, warm coat wrapped tightly around her plush figure, holding Eleanor's elbow with a steady, practiced grip. Gabriel was 50 yards away, standing on the stone patio with his hands in his pockets, a rare, genuine smile softening his harsh features as he watched the two most important women in his life. None of them knew that Declan O'Sullivan had paid off a corrupt city inspector to access the old, forgotten drainage tunnels that led directly beneath the estate's reinforced walls. It happened with devastating speed. There was no cinematic warning, no shouting, just the sudden, sickening crack, crack, crack of suppressed automatic weapon fire. The tranquility of the garden shattered. The heavy stone bird bath, 10 feet from Harper, exploded into dust and shrapnel. "Boss, get down!" a bodyguard roared from the patio, diving toward Gabriel. But Gabriel was already moving, tearing his custom Glock from his shoulder holster. His eyes locked on the tree line where 3 men in black tactical gear had breached the perimeter. Down in the garden, time slowed to an agonizing crawl for Harper. She heard the distinct, terrifying zip of a bullet cutting the air right past her ear. She looked to her right. One of the assassins, a towering man with a heavily scarred face, had his weapon raised and leveled directly at Eleanor's chest. Eleanor froze, her eyes wide with the sudden realization of her own death. She was too frail, too slow. She couldn't drop to the ground. She couldn't run. Harper didn't think. There was no conscious decision, no weighing of her own life against the old woman's. There was only a fierce, blinding instinct to protect. Harper lunged. She threw her entire body weight forward, wrapping her thick, strong arms around Eleanor and pivoting forcefully, dragging the matriarch down toward the damp earth. Harper used her broad back and heavy curves to completely blanket the fragile older woman, turning herself into a human shield of flesh and bone. Thwack! The first bullet tore into the back of Harper's right shoulder. The sheer kinetic force of the 9mm round felt like being struck by a sledgehammer. A white-hot explosion of agony radiated through her nervous system, forcing a guttural scream from her throat. But she didn't loosen her grip on Eleanor. "Harper!" Gabriel's voice tore through the garden, a sound of absolute, inhuman terror. Thwack! Thwack! 2 more rounds slammed into the center of Harper's back, narrowly missing her spine, but ripping through muscle and sinking deep into her flesh. She violently convulsed, her mouth opening in a silent gasp as the air was forcefully punched from her lungs. Blood instantly soaked the back of her tan coat, blossoming like dark, horrifying roses. The assassins were trying to adjust their aim to finish the old woman, but Harper was completely covering her. Eleanor was screaming beneath her, weeping and begging Harper to let go. But Harper only squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her body heavier against the ground. Thwack! A 4th bullet grazed her heavy hip, tearing through tissue. Thwack! A 5th round buried itself deep into her lower side. By now, Gabriel had closed the distance. He was no longer a man. He was a demon unleashed. He didn't seek cover. He walked straight into the line of fire, his gun barking with deadly, terrifying precision. Pop, pop, pop. 3 headshots. The 3 O'Sullivan hit men dropped dead to the grass before their empty shell casings even hit the dirt. The garden fell into a horrifying, ringing silence, broken only by Eleanor's hysterical sobbing and the wet, gurgling sound of Harper trying to breathe. Gabriel dropped to his knees, sliding the last few feet in the bloody mud. His hands, which had ended countless lives without a tremor, were shaking violently. He grabbed the shoulder of Harper's coat, rolling her gently off his mother. "Ma, are you hit? Are you hit?" Gabriel shouted, his eyes scanning his mother. No, she covered me, Gabriel. She took them all." Eleanor wailed, her hands stained with Harper's blood. Gabriel looked down at the woman in his arms. Harper's eyes were half open, her pupils blown wide with shock. Her face, usually so warm and full of color, was draining to a terrifying ashen gray. Blood was pouring from her back, pooling in the soft curves of her waist and soaking into Gabriel's suit pants. "Harper, hey, look at me," Gabriel commanded, his voice cracking as he pressed his large hands frantically against the wounds on her back, trying to stem the catastrophic bleeding. The blood was warm and slippery, pouring through his fingers no matter how hard he pressed. "Medic! Get the fucking medics down here now!" he roared at the guards rushing the lawn. Harper looked up at him. She tried to smile, but a thin line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Did I?" she wheezed, every syllable a battle against the fluid filling her lungs. "She's safe, my mother is safe," Gabriel choked out, tears, hot, unfamiliar tears, spilling over his dark lashes and dripping onto Harper's pale face. "You saved her, but you're not going to die. Do you hear me? You don't have my permission to die, Harper." "I'm so heavy," Harper whispered, her mind beginning to float away on a cloud of dark, merciful numbness. She felt like she was sinking into the earth. "You're perfect," Gabriel sobbed, pulling her heavier, bleeding body fully into his lap, not caring about the blood, not caring about the men watching their invincible boss break down. He cradled her soft face against his chest. "You're perfect, and I have you. Stay with me." Dr. Harrison, the syndicate's underground trauma surgeon, sprinted across the lawn with a medical kit, falling to his knees beside them. He took one look at the 5 entry wounds, the frothy blood at her lips indicating a collapsed lung, and the sheer volume of blood loss. He looked up at Gabriel, his face grim. "Boss, we need to get her to the clinic under the house right now. But her pulse is thready. With this much trauma, prepare yourself." "If she dies, Harrison, you all die," Gabriel snarled, his eyes flashing with a violent, possessive madness. He didn't wait for a stretcher. Gathering every ounce of his strength, Gabriel scooped Harper's limp, heavy body into his arms. He held her tightly to his chest, feeling her blood seep directly through his shirt to his own skin, and began to run toward the house. The woman everyone had overlooked had just taken 5 bullets for his blood, and as Gabriel felt her heart stutter against his chest, he knew with terrifying certainty, if Harper Hayes died today, he would burn the entire city of Chicago to ash. The subterranean medical facility beneath the Romano estate smelled violently of industrial bleach, copper, and the sharp, sterile bite of iodine. It was a sensory assault that Gabriel would associate with pure terror for the rest of his life. For 6 agonizing hours, the heavy steel doors to the trauma suite remained sealed shut. Gabriel sat on the cold concrete floor in the hallway, his charcoal suit stiff and heavy with Harper's dried blood. He hadn't washed his hands. The rust-colored flakes clinging to his knuckles were the only physical proof he had left of the woman fighting for her life on the other side of the wall. Beside him, Eleanor sat in a wheelchair, her trembling hands clutching a rosary, her lips moving in a silent, continuous prayer. The silence of the hallway was broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the ventilation system. Gabriel's mind was a dark, violent storm. He kept feeling the heavy, yielding weight of Harper in his arms, kept seeing the horrific bloom of crimson spreading across her tan coat. She had thrown herself onto the concrete without a second of hesitation. She, a woman the world had constantly told to take up less space, had used every inch of her soft, broad body to shield his mother from the brutal reality of his world. When the heavy steel door finally clicked and hissed open, Dr. Harrison stepped out. The surgeon looked aged, his green scrubs soaked with sweat and blood, his surgical mask hanging loosely around his neck. Gabriel stood up, his joints popping, his massive frame suddenly looking hollow. "Harrison, she's alive," Harrison exhaled, his voice hoarse. Gabriel felt his knees buckle slightly, a physical wave of relief crashing into his chest. "But Gabriel, it's a miracle she is. We extracted 5 rounds. 1 shattered her right scapula. 2 missed her spine by millimeters, tearing through the latissimus dorsi. The ones in her hip and side caused severe tissue damage and internal bleeding. She lost a catastrophic amount of blood. We had to transfuse 6 units. She's in a medically induced coma to let the swelling in her chest cavity go down. "When does she wake up?" Gabriel demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I don't know," Harrison said honestly, rubbing his eyes. "The next 48 hours are critical. If she avoids infection and her lungs clear, she has a chance. But Gabriel, her recovery will be brutal. She's going to be in an immense amount of pain." "Give her whatever she needs," Gabriel ordered, stepping past the doctor and pushing open the door. The sight of her almost broke him. Harper looked impossibly small in the center of the massive surgical bed. Thick plastic tubes snaked down her throat, breathing for her. IV lines pumped clear fluids and dark blood into her bruised arms. The monitors beeped with a slow, steady rhythm that felt entirely too fragile. Gabriel pulled a metal stool to the bedside, the legs scraping harshly against the floor tiles. He took her cold, swollen hand gently between his large, blood-stained palms, pressing her knuckles to his lips. While Gabriel sat in the sterile purgatory of the clinic, his lieutenants were tearing the city apart. By midnight, his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas, entered the medical wing. Thomas carried a thick manila folder, his expression grim. "We scrubbed the phones of the 3 O'Sullivan shooters," Thomas said quietly, not wanting to disturb the silence of the room. "Boss, the O'Sullivans didn't pull this off alone. They couldn't have breached the botanical garden without the estate's blueprints and the patrol schedules." Gabriel didn't look away from Harper's pale face. "Who sold us out?" "No one in the family. It came from the outside." Thomas opened the folder, pulling out printed surveillance photos and bank routing numbers. "Deputy Commissioner William Bradley, Chicago PD. He's been quietly taking payouts from the O'Sullivans for 2 years. Bradley provided the hitmen with the municipal drainage blueprints that lead under our walls. He also pulled the patrol cars off the highway surrounding the estate this morning to guarantee them a clean getaway." Gabriel's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek. The rage that filled him wasn't the hot, explosive anger of his youth. It was cold. It was absolute. For decades, the Romanos had operated on a brutal, primitive code of blood for blood. If someone shot at you, you shot back. But looking at the heavy, dark bruises forming on Harper's skin, Gabriel realized that bullets were too merciful for the men who had done this to her. A bullet was quick. A bullet was the easy way out. Deputy Commissioner Bradley represented the worst kind of systemic rot, a man who hid behind a badge and the public trust while orchestrating murder for profit. "We aren't going to kill him," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute whisper. Thomas blinked in surprise. "Boss, he gave the order that put 5 bullets in the girl." "I know," Gabriel replied, finally turning his dark eyes toward his lieutenant. "If we kill him, he dies a martyr in the line of duty, a hero cop struck down by the mob. His family gets a pension. The city throws a parade. No. I want him ruined. I want him stripped of everything. I want the world to see the filth he is." Gabriel outlined a plan that marked a complete shift in the Romano Syndicate's history. He ordered Thomas to gather every piece of financial data, every recorded phone call and every wire transfer connecting Bradley to the O'Sullivans. They wouldn't send hitmen. They would send the evidence directly to the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force, the local news stations, and the district attorney, all simultaneously. "And the O'Sullivans?" Thomas asked. "Burn their legitimate businesses to the ground. Supply chain disruptions, union strikes at their docks, tax audits. Choke their cash flow until they eat each other," Gabriel commanded. He looked back at Harper, gently brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "This city is going to change, because she deserves a world that isn't soaked in blood." The hard karma Gabriel orchestrated hit Chicago like a devastating earthquake. 5 days after the shooting, Deputy Commissioner William Bradley was handcuffed and dragged out of his suburban home at dawn. Swarmed by federal agents and local news crews, the Romano evidence dump was foolproof, meticulous, and completely damning. Bradley wasn't just exposed for the hit on the Romanos. The financial records revealed a decade of extortion, framing innocent people and protecting violent predators. The public disgrace was absolute. Bradley was denied bail, thrown into federal holding, and left to rot as his assets were frozen and his family fled the city in shame. Within weeks, the O'Sullivan family, cut off from their police protection and bleeding money from Gabriel's relentless economic warfare, fractured. The old ways of the Mafia were dying, and Gabriel was holding the pillow over their face. But Gabriel cared little for the headlines dominating the city. His entire universe had shrunk to the 4 walls of Harper's recovery room. On the 8th day, the rhythm of the ventilator changed. Harper's amber eyes fluttered open, heavy and confused. The first thing she felt was the agonizing, burning pain stretching across her back and ribs, a deep structural ache that made her gasp. The second thing she felt was the large, warm weight of Gabriel's hand holding hers. "Don't try to speak," Gabriel said instantly, his voice thick with unwept tears as he leaned over her. He hit the call button for the nurse. "You're safe. You're in my home. My mother is safe. You saved her." Harper squeezed his hand weakly. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye, slipping down into her hairline. She was alive. The recovery was an agonizing, humiliating process. For a woman used to being the strong one, being the caregiver, relying on others to help her sit up, bathe, and eat, was a harsh mental battle. Her beautiful plush body had been violently altered. Angry red surgical scars tracked across her broad back and dipped into the soft curves of her waist. Deep, puckered bullet wounds marked the places where her flesh had absorbed the trauma meant for Eleanor. One evening, a month into her physical therapy, Harper was sitting on the edge of the bed in Gabriel's private suite. The heavy bandages had finally been removed. She stared at her reflection in the large vanity mirror across the room, wrapping her arms around her stomach. She looked at the ruined, scarred landscape of her back in the reflection, her breathing shallow. Gabriel stepped out of the connected bathroom, wearing only a pair of dark sweat pants. He saw where her eyes were fixed. He walked up behind her, his large, scarred chest pressing gently against her uninjured shoulder. He didn't offer pity. He didn't look away. "I look like a battlefield," Harper whispered, her voice cracking with raw vulnerability. "I was already too heavy for the world. Now I'm broken too." Gabriel knelt on the floor in front of her, wedging himself between her knees. He looked up into her amber eyes with a fierce, unwavering devotion that made Harper's breath catch. He reached out, his calloused hands tracing the soft, heavy curve of her hips, entirely bypassing the scars, to focus on the warmth of her skin. "You are the most magnificent thing I have ever seen," Gabriel said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble of absolute truth. "You aren't broken, Harper. You're the foundation. You took the worst this miserable world had to offer, and you didn't break. These scars. He leaned forward, pressing a soft, reverent kiss to the puckered wound on her side. These are the price of my mother's life. They are medals, and your body is perfect. It is strong. It is exactly as it was meant to be. Harper let out a ragged sob, her hands coming up to bury themselves in Gabriel's thick, dark hair. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely seen, entirely valued, and completely safe. In the months that followed, the Romano syndicate underwent a total rebirth. Having dismantled the corrupt forces that tried to bury them, Gabriel aggressively transitioned his family's wealth into legitimate real estate, logistics, and private security. The violence that had defined his family for 3 generations was systematically buried. He had been reborn in the fire of Harper's sacrifice, determined to be a man worthy of the woman who held his heart. By the time the Chicago winter melted into a vibrant, hopeful spring, the Romano estate had transformed. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere was gone. Harper walked through the botanical gardens, her gait slightly altered, but her spirit unbroken. She was leaning on a sleek, black cane, but she wasn't walking behind anyone. She was walking side by side with Gabriel. She wore a stunning emerald green wrap dress that highlighted her lush, beautiful curves, the fabric catching the afternoon breeze. Eleanor sat on the patio, drinking tea and smiling as she watched her son wrap his arm around Harper's waist, pulling her close to kiss the top of her head. Harper Hayes had walked into a fortress of killers as an invisible, overlooked woman. She had bled for them, fought for them, and in the end, she had saved them. Not just from bullets, but from themselves. She was no longer just the physical therapist. She was the immovable, beating heart of the family, a woman who proved that the softest bodies often harbor the most unbreakable souls. And Gabriel Romano, the most dangerous man in Chicago, belonged entirely to her. If Harper's incredible courage and Gabriel's ultimate sacrifice for love moved you, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that true strength comes in all shapes and sizes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic, real-life story of survival, justice, and unexpected romance. Drop a comment below.